At the very heart of the UFC, there's this fundamental conflict. You've got the fighter, right? Their ability to compete is finite. Their body is a perishable asset. And on the other side, you have the platform, this massive global brand that's built to last, well, forever. We're going to break down exactly how that relationship works, and we're basing all of this on a really detailed institutional report. And this quote right here, it just nails the central thesis. Think about it. A fighter has just a handful of years, this tiny biological window, to make a living. But the platform, it can use the recordings of those fights, that archive, forever. This single idea is honestly the key to understanding everything else we're about to talk about. All right, so how does this actually play out in the real world? To really get the scale of it, you've got to follow the money. And let me tell you, the financial data behind the UFC is, well, it's pretty staggering. So let's just start at the top. According to the audited financial filings from their parent company, the UFC pulled in $1.5 billion in revenue for fiscal year 2025. And that's not some wild guess. That's a hard audited number. But it's not just about what's coming in. It's about how much they keep. The UFC has a 57% adjusted EBITDA margin. Now, simply put, that's a measure of pure operational profit. And for just about any business in any industry you can think of, a 57% margin is incredibly, incredibly high. And here's where you really see just how durable the platform is. The UFC has a $7.7 billion media deal with Paramount. What that does is guarantee a massive, stable, and predictable river of cash for 7 years. And it doesn't matter who's fighting, the money is tied to the brand, to the platform, not to any single athlete. Okay, so with all these billions flowing in from TV rights, from sponsorships, from ticket sales, it brings us to the single most important question, right? How much of that pie actually makes its way to the athletes who are, the product? And this chart, wow, this chart really tells the story. Based on estimates that came out of antitrust litigation, UFC fighters get somewhere between 13 and 20% of the revenue. Now compare that to the big leagues in the US, the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, where the players get between 47 and 57%. Why? Because they have collective bargaining agreements. I mean, the gap is just enormous. So how on earth is a financial structure like this maintained? How does it work? Well, the report we're looking at identifies 5 key mechanisms that both create and reinforce this lopsided system. Let's really dig into the how that's behind all those numbers. So these are the 5 pillars that hold the whole thing up: substitution logic, narrative stabilization, archive monetization, time horizon asymmetry, and finally, separated risk and revenue. Let's take a quick look at what each of those actually means. Okay, so first up is substitution logic. The UFC has built this incredible system with a huge roster and a constant pipeline of new talent, thanks to things like the Contender Series. Think of it like a conveyor belt of fighters. This makes any one fighter, even a huge star, functionally replaceable. If one fighter leaves, another one is right there to step in. And that, naturally, just tanks an individual's bargaining power. The second mechanism is what the report calls narrative stabilization. In other words, it's about controlling the story. This quote here from the UFC's president, which, by the way, was entered into a court record, is the perfect example. When he says, "We're the NFL," he's reinforcing this idea that the UFC is the only game in town, that they are absolutely indispensable. Third is archive monetization, and this takes us right back to the central idea of this whole thing. A fighter's career ends and the paychecks stop. But that footage, the rights to those fights, that becomes a permanent revenue-generating asset for the platform. It's a golden goose that literally never expires. The fourth mechanism, time horizon asymmetry, builds right on top of that last point. You see, fighters are in a sprint against their own biology. Their career is measured in years. But the platform, the corporation, it's running a marathon. It's thinking in decades. It can outweight any single athlete and just keep accumulating value over a timeline that no fighter can possibly match. So we've talked about the financial structure, the mechanisms, but there is a very real, very tangible human cost to all of this. The report calls it the human ledger. These are the costs that are borne entirely by the fighters themselves. And what's really critical to understand here is that these are what the report calls off-balance sheet costs. They are devastatingly real, but they don't show up on any UFC financial statement. A major study by the Cleveland Clinic documented statistically significant cognitive decline in fighters, and yet there's no documented pension plan, no provision by the platform for post-career neurological care. All of those long-term biological costs, they fall squarely on the individual. To make this less abstract, let's look at a case study from the report. You have an undisputed champion, someone at the absolute peak of their leverage and fame, who leaves the organization on very bad terms. But even they couldn't change the fundamental dynamic. They walked away, but their fight archive, their past performances stayed behind, and the platform continues to use it to make money. And all of this leads us to the fifth and final mechanism, the one that really ties this entire system together, the separation of risk from revenue. Look at this table. It's so simple, but it says everything. The platform takes on zero direct bodily risk, yet has the highest level of control over the revenue. Meanwhile, the fighter takes on 100% of the bodily risk, but has minimal, if any, control over that same revenue. That, right there, is the fundamental asymmetry of the entire system. So, after seeing all of this laid out, you're probably asking the same thing I was. Well, can anything even change this? Are there any levers that could possibly adjust the structure? Well, the source report does identify 3 potential levers, and they're all grounded in existing legal and regulatory frameworks. The first is antitrust litigation, which is already happening. The second is a potential regulatory reclassification of fighters, changing their status from independent contractors to employees. And the third, of course, is collective action, like forming a fighters union. Look, we have really just scratched the surface of a very deep, very data-driven analysis here. To see all the evidence for yourself, to read the case studies, and to understand the full methodology, I seriously recommend you download and read the complete report.